They called it a miracle, a spontaneous recovery, a gift from the universe. But I know the truth. I know that the moment I changed her bandage, the one covering that deep, old incision scar on her neck, I did something that went against every protocol, every rule, every fear I had. And I know that what happened next didn't just wake her up. It destroyed my career, shattered a family's facade, and left me holding a secret that was worth billions of dollars. I was just a young, overworked resident, a doctor, in training, tending to the most famous, most beautiful, and most comatose woman in the entire city, a millionaire heiress named Eleanor Vance. She had been a ghost in a hospital bed for over 3 years. Nobody expected her to ever open her eyes again. But she did. She looked right at me, her eyes clear and terrifyingly sane, and her first words were not "Where am I?" or "What happened?" but a chilling, quiet whisper, "Tell no one about the key." The key to what? I had no idea. All I had done was change a bandage. So tell me, was I completely, irrevocably wrong to listen to a voice I shouldn't have even heard, and to protect a secret that wasn't mine, just because it was whispered by a woman who had just returned from the absolute silence of a coma? To understand the sheer magnitude of this mess, you have to know who Eleanor Vance was, and what my life was like before she woke up. I was Dr. Ethan Miller, a second-year neurosurgery resident at one of the most prestigious and equally brutal hospitals in the country. My life was sleep deprivation, instant coffee, and the overwhelming debt that came with a medical education. I was a nobody, but I was good at my job, meticulous, quiet, and hyper-focused. Eleanor Vance, on the other hand, was everything I wasn't. She was the face of the Vance Corporation, a global energy and real estate empire. Imagine a cross between a royal princess and a Silicon Valley mogul, all grace, ruthless intelligence, and unimaginable wealth. 3 years before I met her, she was involved in a private helicopter crash over the Atlantic. Her older brother, the heir apparent, died instantly. Eleanor survived, pulled from the wreckage with a traumatic brain injury that left her in a persistent vegetative state. For 3 years, her room on the top floor of the hospital was like a shrine, a quiet, sterile temple of incredible expense. Security guards, private nurses, and the best equipment money could buy, all dedicated to keeping a beautiful shell alive. The Vance family paid the hospital so much money that the entire floor was practically reserved for her, and that money filtered down, making our jobs slightly less miserable. I was assigned to her case once a week for routine neurological checks, but mostly it was just maintenance. Change the dressings, check the lines, keep her comfortable. That's where the key bandage comes in. Eleanor had this deep scar, a precise, surgically clean incision right at the base of her neck, just above her collarbone. It was old, from an operation done years before the crash, and it required a simple, routine dressing change. The private nurse usually handled it, but one morning she was tied up, and my attending doctor, Jen, a man whose patience was thinner than paper, just grunted, "Miller, just change the neck dressing on Vance. I don't have time for this mundane nonsense." It was a tiny thing, maybe 2 inches long, and I'd barely paid attention to it before. But as I peeled off the old bandage that day, something felt different. The skin around the scar was faintly irritated, not infected, but almost bruised, and the scar itself looked newer than I remembered, or perhaps I'd just never looked closely enough. It had a strange, almost geometric quality to it, a subtle indentation at one end, as if it wasn't just a surgical closure, but something designed. A flicker of worry went through me, but I rationalized it away as pressure from the bed or a trick of the light. I cleaned the area, applied the fresh dressing, and was about to leave when it happened. Her hand, which had been limp and unresponsive for years, twitched. Then her eyelids fluttered open. I froze, my medical training crashing into a wall of absolute disbelief. I didn't reach for the crash cart. I didn't shout for the nurse. I just stared into the deepest, most intelligent blue eyes I have ever seen. And she whispered that word, key. Her voice was a dry rasp, barely audible. The key, tell no one. Then, just as suddenly, her eyes rolled back, and she was gone again, back to her deep, unnerving sleep. My heart hammered against my ribs. I practically sprinted to the nurse's station and grabbed Dr. Chen. Dr. Chen, she spoke. She woke up just for a second. She said something. He looked at me like I was a hysterical first-year student. Miller, you're running on 2 hours of sleep. Eleanor Vance's brain function is minimal. You heard nothing. Go get a coffee and check her vitals again. Document a minor generalized spasm if you must. That's the thing about the medical world. You doubt your own senses before you question the immutable diagnosis of a senior doctor, especially when that diagnosis is attached to a multi-billion-dollar estate. But I knew what I heard. I went back to the room, my hands shaking as I checked her vitals. Everything was stable. Nothing unusual in the neurological exam. I felt like I was losing my mind, so I went to the one person I trusted, my best friend and fellow resident, Dr. Sarah Kim. I told her everything, the twitch, the eyes, the whisper. Sarah, bless her, looked at me with a mix of concern and fascination. Ethan? She said, pulling me into the deserted break room. 3 years is a long time. People have spontaneous temporary awakenings. The key could be anything, a residual memory, a dream fragment. The key to her house, the key to her parents' vault. But here's the thing. If you document what you think you heard and it's a false alarm, Dr. Chen will have your head. But if you're right and she's starting to emerge, you need to find out why and how before someone else does. The someone else Sarah was referring to was Eleanor's uncle, Mr. Jonathan Vance. He was Eleanor's legal guardian, the acting CEO of the Vance Corporation, and the man who stood to inherit everything if Eleanor was declared legally deceased. He visited Eleanor every single day, always impeccably dressed, always with a bouquet of expensive but scentless lilies, and always with a look on his face that was either profound sorrow or cold calculation. I could never tell which. He had this unsettling habit of just standing there watching her for an hour at a time, never speaking. His visits always felt less like a show of family love and more like a private inspection of a very expensive, very broken asset. The next morning, I was back on her floor, pretending to do my rounds, but I went straight for the neck dressing. I carefully removed the new bandage I had placed, and that's when I saw it. The geometric indentation I noticed was unmistakable now. It was a faint, almost invisible circular mark, slightly darker than the scar tissue, a tiny, perfect circle pressed into the skin at one end of the incision. I couldn't feel anything underneath, no foreign object, no bump. It was like a miniature tattoo or a faint stamp. I quickly replaced the dressing, my heart pounding this time not with shock, but with a creeping sense of paranoia. The key, she had said. I didn't know what it was, but I knew who would be very interested in keeping her from saying it again. Uncle Jonathan. My paranoia intensified over the next few weeks. I started doing all of Eleanor's routine checks myself, making excuses to Dr. Chen. I kept my findings, the faint circular mark, the one brief word, completely to myself and Sarah. And then, one rainy afternoon, I was reviewing her older medical files in the basement archives, looking for any mention of the prior surgery that left the scar. I had to pull a lot of strings and promise a lot of coffee runs to the records custodian to get access. I found the file, 5 years old, detailing a minor prophylactic procedure by a private surgeon named Dr. Alistair Finch. The notes were minimal, almost suspiciously so. But there was one line, scribbled in the margin in a different handwriting, maybe a nurse's, that made my blood run cold. Patient required specialized dressing. Advised against X-ray. Why on earth would a simple, prophylactic procedure need to be hidden from an X-ray? And why was the note advised against? My mind raced. Could this be a medical device, a pump, a tiny monitoring unit, And why was it so secret? I decided to do something extremely reckless. I took my phone, turned off the flash, and took a high-resolution photo of the neck scar without the dressing on, focusing specifically on that faint circular mark. Then I put the phone in a radiation-shielded pouch, which we used for sensitive electronics, and I slipped it into my scrub pocket. I was risking my entire career, my license, everything, for a millionaire I didn't even know, and a hunch based on a single word. That night, I was sitting alone in the cafeteria, trying to make sense of the photo, when Mr. Vance approached me. He didn't sit down, he just loomed over my table. "Dr. Miller, you've been very diligent with my niece's care lately. That's commendable. The hospital appreciates your effort. We appreciate it." His voice was smooth as polished stone, but his eyes were hard. "I simply wanted to ensure that you are focusing on the official medical prognosis. Eleanor is in a persistent state. There is no change, any sudden. False hopes can be very distressing to the family and to the hospital's reputation." It was a threat, cloaked in pleasantries. He knew I was looking into things. I swallowed hard, my coffee turning to ash in my mouth. "Of course, Mr. Vance. I'm following the attending physician's orders precisely." I hated the lie, but I couldn't risk exposing what little I knew. That night, Sarah and I analyzed the photo on a high-resolution hospital monitor, using a secure, closed network. We zoomed in on the circular mark. Sarah, being far smarter than me, noticed something I missed. "Ethan, look closer at the edges. It's not just a circle, it's a 6-point indentation, like a very, very small internal screw head. This isn't a medical device for healing. It looks like an access port. An access port? To what?" It was then, looking at the detail, that a truly insane yet logical thought struck me. This wasn't a standard hospital case. This was a private installation. It was something designed to be secret, built into her body before the crash, and likely hidden from the hospital staff. I remembered the old medical file, advised against X-ray. If this was an access port, then what was inside? Something that could kill her if it was found, or something that was keeping her unconscious. The next few weeks were a blur of research, fear, and secrecy. I dove into obscure cutting-edge neurobiology journals, looking for any experimental devices, any theoretical technology that could be implanted like this. Sarah, using her contacts, looked into Dr. Alistair Finch, the surgeon. What she found was a dead end, Doctor. Finch had died in a tragic boating accident, 6 months after Eleanor's helicopter crash. It was too convenient. The surgeon who implanted the secret device was gone. Uncle Jonathan, the man who stood to inherit, was pressuring the attending doctor to move to the next phase. A hearing to declare Eleanor legally dead. The clock was ticking. If that hearing happened, Mr. Vance would take over the corporation completely. My only proof that something was wrong was a single whispered word, a faint mark, and a gut feeling that a very rich man was trying to cover up a monumental crime. I knew I couldn't go to the police. I had no evidence, only conjecture and an incredibly blurry photo of a minor scar. They would laugh me out of the station. I had to take a risk. I had to know what was beneath that access port. And that brings us to the most critical, terrifying decision of my life. The moment I crossed the line from a responsible doctor to a nervous, desperate detective. I had to decide if I would actually take a scalpel to the heiress of a multi-billion-dollar fortune, an act that would undoubtedly end my career and potentially land me in prison. The only thing standing between me and being struck off the medical register was a woman who had been silent for 3 years, and who might never wake up again. So that's the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice. I had a week before Uncle Jonathan's legal team was expected to file the petition for the declaration of death. I knew I couldn't sit back and watch. But my options were nuclear. I could expose myself, my photo, my suspicions to the authorities and face immediate suspension and investigation. Or I could take a final reckless risk and try Open that access port myself without anesthesia, without supervision, and without knowing what was inside. Before I tell you what happened next, what I did, and what I found hidden beneath the skin of the sleeping millionaire, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have played it safe, protected your career, and let the millionaire heiress simply disappear? Or would you have risked everything to find out what the key unlocked? I chose the risk. I chose Eleanor. The day before the filing was due, I waited until my night shift rotation, when the private nurse took her mandated dinner break, a precious 20-minute window when I knew the room would be completely empty, save for the patient and me. I told Sarah I needed her on the floor below, ready to cover for me if anyone came looking. I prepared a small sterile tray with the most delicate instruments I could find, a magnifying loupe, a surgical scalpel, and a pair of very fine micro-forceps. I remember the air in the room being absolutely still, heavy with the scent of sterile linens. I pulled the curtain around the bed, a useless gesture, but one that made me feel like I had a shred of privacy. My hands were shaking so badly I had to pause and take 3 deep, slow breaths. I carefully peeled off the dressing. The circular 6-point indentation seemed to mock me. I put on the magnifying loupe. The indentation was so small, no larger than the head of a pin, and it was perfectly flush with the skin. It wasn't a screw head, it was a microscopic slot, designed to be engaged by a special tool. Since I didn't have the special tool, I had to improvise. I used the tip of the microscalpel, using the slightest, most controlled pressure, trying to insert the point into the 6 tiny slots. I worked for 10 agonizing minutes, a lifetime in a hospital, sweat stinging my eyes, fully aware that a single slip could leave a lasting, visible scar. Finally, with a sensation so faint I almost missed it, the tiny port gave. It didn't pop or click. It slid inward, a fraction of a millimeter, and then a minuscule, flexible metallic wire, thinner than a human hair, coiled out of the port, a bright, silver thread against the pallor of her skin. And on the very tip of that wire was a single, tiny, perfectly formed metal cube. It was maybe 2 millimeters on a side. It was so small it was almost invisible. I used the forceps to gently grasp the tiny cube and pulled the entire wire free. As the wire cleared the port, the access point sealed itself instantly, leaving nothing but the old, clean scar. I placed the tiny cube on a sterile pad and stared at it. It was incredibly light, felt cold, and had a strange, subtle luminescence under the room's fluorescent light. The whole operation had taken maybe 15 minutes. I redressed the wound with a fresh bandage, wiped away the single drop of blood the wire had left, and looked at Eleanor. Her vitals were stable. Her breathing was steady. She was exactly as she had been before. I slipped the cube and the wire into a sealed biohazard container and left the room, walking with unnatural slowness past the nurse's station, trying to appear utterly normal. I met Sarah in the stairwell. She took one look at my face and ushered me into a supply closet. I opened the container. Her eyes went wide. "Ethan, what is that?" "The key," I whispered. "I think this is the key. We couldn't analyze it at the hospital. Too risky." So, 2 hours later, after my shift ended and I'd put in a believable appearance of collapsing from exhaustion, I took the sealed container to a private forensic lab a friend of Sarah's owed us a massive favor at. We waited until 3 a.m., watching the lab technician, a pale, quiet man named Marcus, work. Marcus ran the tiny metal cube through every test he had: spectrometry, chemical analysis, even a basic electromagnetic scan. The results were astounding. The cube was a composite, a mixture of a highly stable memory alloy and, this is the terrifying part, a very specific, custom-engineered bioluminescent polymer. But the most significant finding was the data. The cube was a memory drive. It contained a compressed data file, a gigantic file that was only accessible via a unique encryption key. Marcus was good, But this was next-level security. "It's a vault, Doctor," Marcus said, rubbing his eyes. "The kind of encryption the government uses to hide state secrets. It's not just a key, it's the entire day, a safe, and the key is a phrase, a pattern, or maybe another physical object." I was deflated. I had risked everything for an encrypted box. I looked at the tiny cube, remembering Eleanor's whisper, "Tell no one about the key." She wasn't telling me the name of the key. She was telling me this tiny memory block was the key. It was the only thing standing between Uncle Jonathan and his inheritance. I told Marcus to clone the data, keep a copy safe, and give me the original physical cube. I had to return to the hospital. Something had changed. When I got back about an hour before Dr. Chen's morning rounds, I slipped into Eleanor's room to check on her, a nervous habit now. I stood by her bed, looking at the bandage, and as I did, I noticed a tiny, almost imperceptible twitching of her fingers, faster this time, more purposeful. I looked closer. Her eyes were still closed, but her jaw was clenching and her lips were moving. I leaned in. This time, her voice was less of a whisper and more of a dry, cracked speech. She said a name, a man's name, a woman's name, a city, and then a series of numbers, a very long sequence. She repeated the sequence 3 times, her face a mask of effort and pain. Then she fell utterly still again. I scrambled for my phone and typed the sequence and the names into my notes. It hit me like a physical blow. She was giving me the encryption key. The implanted memory drive was now physically removed, meaning whatever was designed to keep her silent or asleep was gone. The shock of being freed from the device must have triggered the final, desperate surge of consciousness enough for her to give me the password before retreating back into the coma. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle. I raced back to the forensic lab with the notes. I practically shoved the paper into Marcus's hand. He typed the sequence into the decryption software. The progress bar crawled, agonizingly slow, and then it turned green. The data was unlocked. What poured out was not a financial ledger, or a will, or corporate secrets. It was a video file. I hit play. The screen showed a private hospital room not unlike Eleanor's. The date stamp was 4 years old. It was Eleanor, awake, healthy, and speaking directly to the camera. Her voice was clear, strong, and brimming with icy resolve. She confirmed my worst fears. "If you are watching this, I am either dead or I have been forcibly incapacitated," she began. The video went on to explain everything. The prophylactic procedure 5 years ago was actually the implantation of a cutting-edge experimental neurological inhibitor, a tiny remote-controlled device designed to put her into a medically induced coma if activated. Eleanor had discovered that her uncle, Jonathan Vance, along with a cabal of corporate directors, was embezzling billions and running the Vance Corporation into the ground. They were going to frame her older brother, the current CEO, for the crime. Eleanor, knowing they would target her next, created this extreme, desperate plan. The implanted device was her nuclear option. She secretly created the video, detailing the proof of the embezzlement, detailed accounts, signed confessions, wire transfer records, all stored on that tiny memory cube. Her plan was to activate the device herself, go into a coma, and become untouchable. The crash, it wasn't an accident. Her brother was murdered when he discovered the plan and refused to go along with it. The conspirators, thinking the helicopter crash had killed her, simply allowed her to remain comatose, using her medical state as an alibi and a cover-up. The tiny access port was a mistake, a slight flaw in the device's original design, which she had insisted be left untouched so she could access it, or someone else could. She knew the implant was slowly being powered down by her body, which is why she was able to achieve that brief moment of consciousness when I changed the bandage, a moment to whisper the single word that could save her life. The video contained a final, devastating revelation, a second legally binding will, proving that she had signed over the entire Vance Corporation in the event of her incapacitation or death to a series of international charities, effectively cutting her uncle and his co-conspirators out of a cent. She hadn't made me a millionaire. She had made me the executor of a $1 billion philanthropic trust. My job, she said, was to take the data to the FBI field office in Geneva, Switzerland, whose contact information was embedded in the file. The aftermath was a storm that blew the roof off the hospital, the city, and the financial world. I followed Eleanor's instructions. I didn't go to the local authorities. I took a rushed flight to Geneva with the memory cube. I met the designated FBI agent. The data was irrefutable. The entire video, all the documents, the accounts, it was all there. I was flown back under tight security. Within 48 hours, the news broke. Jonathan Vance was arrested in his office by federal agents, charged with conspiracy to commit murder, corporate fraud, and attempted concealment of evidence. The Vance Corporation stock tanked, but the philanthropic will stabilized the situation, sending shockwaves through the corporate world. My career, it was over. The hospital immediately suspended my medical license, pending a full investigation into my unauthorized medical procedure and theft of patient information. Dr. Chen, furious and terrified of the lawsuit, testified against me. But here's the twist. The hospital couldn't make it stick. They couldn't deny what I had done had saved her life and exposed a massive criminal operation. The narrative of the young doctor's daring act was already in the press. The public was on my side, and then Eleanor woke up fully this time. It was a slow, difficult recovery, but she was back, sharp as ever, and she gave a full statement to the press. She vouched for me. She testified that I had acted as her agent, following her silent, final directive. She even wrote a letter to the medical board, effectively clearing my name. I didn't get my residency back, Dr. Chen and the board found another technicality, but I didn't care. I didn't want to work there anymore anyway. Eleanor, once fully recovered, kept her promise. She didn't make me rich, but she didn't let me sink either. She created a massive, privately funded foundation dedicated to research in neurotrauma, and she made me the chief medical advisor with a salary that dwarfed my doctor's pay. I'm no longer Dr. Miller the resident. I'm Dr. Miller, head of a multi-billion-dollar research initiative. And Eleanor Vance, she's running her foundation, not the corporation. She let the new CEO clean up the mess. But every time I see her, she gives me a tiny, knowing smile, and sometimes she touches the scar on her neck. It's a permanent reminder of the secret we share. The real lesson I learned wasn't medical. It was that sometimes the greatest act of healing isn't following the rules, but following your gut, especially when a billionaire heiress has something terrifying hidden beneath a bandage. The money and the power were just the lure. The truth was the reward. So, that's my story, and the story of the day. I traded a scalpel for a secret. If you believe I did the right thing, risking my whole future to listen to that whisper and expose the truth, then like this video right now. Subscribe for more stories like this. I've got a lot more crazy hospital drama, where that came from. And please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Would you have taken the key? I'll see you all in the next story.